In this video, I'll be sharing with you a requested tutorial of how to cut and sew this transparent corset, and this corset is from Synthetic Fit on Instagram. So here's my pattern paper, and I've gone ahead to mark out my basic measurement for this pattern. So I've marked my shoulder to bust, under bust, waist, and then I marked my blouse length or corset length, which I added 5 extra inches after my waist. At the shoulder, I marked my shoulder divided by 2, and I'll come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope or for my shoulder slant. Now after marking that, I'll go ahead and mark a basic neckline of 3 inches by 3 inches. This neckline is serving as a guide for my pattern, and I'll place my ruler and I'm going to connect. So after I'm done connecting, I'm going to place from the neckline to the shoulder slope. So next, I'm going to find my chest line, which is my bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5. Mine gave me 7, which I made a mark, and I'll draw a straight line at that point. Now, I'm going to mark exactly what I have on the shoulder, which is my shoulder divided by 2 on the chest line. Connect it with a straight line all the way up. After this, I'm going to divide what I have here into 2, and I'll come in by ½ inch. Now at the lower part, I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4. After I'm done marking this, I'm going to go ahead to connect those marks starting from the midpoint. I'll take it all the way up, then connect it from that midpoint all the way to my bust circumference divided by 4. Now after I'm done marking this, I'm just going to go ahead to blend out the armhole area. The next step I'll take is to mark my dart, and to mark my dart is my nipple to nipple divided by 2. Now my nipple to nipple is 7 inches divided by 2. I have 3.5 inches, which I'm going to mark this all the way to the corset length. Now I'm going to place my ruler, and I'll also draw a straight line. I'll also mark that nipple to nipple line on my bust line. Now I'm going to connect this all the way to the lower part of my pattern. I'm going to place my ruler, and I'm going to draw a straight line connecting. Now I'll divide what I have at the shoulder into 2, and I'll place my ruler to connect. After I'm done connecting, the next step I'm going to take is to mark my dart. I'm going to go ahead to mark my dart intake of 1 inch on both sides. Now if you're plus size or you're a bit busty, please go ahead to use 1.5 inches. Now I'm going to place my ruler, and I'm going to connect all my lines all the way to the lower part. So I'm using a straight dart so that it will be easier for me to work with. A straight dart is easier, especially for a beginner. Now I'm just going to take this all the way down, so from the under bust, I'll connect to the bust. Repeat this at the other side. Now I'll also go ahead to blend out what I have. Now you're going to decide where you want the neckline to stop. I'm using about 2.5 inches up, and I'll draw a straight line there. Now for my dart intake, I'm marking 0.75. Now I don't want it to gape at that side, or like take out too much dart. If not, I'll be using 1 inch. So for a plus size, you can consider using 1.5 inches or 1.25, just like I reduced my own dart. Now after I'm done connecting at this point, what I'm going to do is to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, and I'll mark. Now the dart I will replace is this at this side, because if I add this one above my chest line, I'll have an excess by the side of my pattern, and for this pattern you don't need much sewing allowance. For the sewing allowance, I just added ½ inch. Now I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake here and replace, then go ahead to add ½ inch for this pattern. Now I'm going to snatch my waistline. My waist is 28. I'm going to minus 2 inches from it, giving me 26. I'll now divide it by 4 inches, then mark. Measure this dart intake I have here. Then I'll go ahead to replace the dart and add my sewing allowance. Here I'll mark my hip circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake, replace and add ½ inch for the joining allowance. So next I'm going to place my ruler and I'll start connecting all these lines together, and starting from the bust to the under bust to the waist, and from the waist to the hip points. So after now, I'm going to mark my bust dart. My bust dart is 1.5. So how I got this is the difference between my shoulder to waist in front and my shoulder to waist at the back. Shoulder to waist in front is 17, while my shoulder to waist at the back is 15.5. If you minus 15.5 from 17, you have 1.5. So now you can decide to use your tracing wheel and go ahead to trace it out, and then transfer all these measurements on the other side. Or you can use this other method, which you're just going to go ahead to cut out your pattern. So before doing that, I'll mark out the neckline. So I came down by ½ inch from my chest line, and I'm going to connect. So while connecting up, I exceeded the 2.5 inches line that I marked earlier. So what I'll do now is just to connect from this point all the way to the neckline. So if you notice, this pattern has like a yoke. This dress looks like a transparent corset that has a yoke, but the yoke is not yet attached to it, right? So now I'll just go ahead to connect this, and after connecting, I'll come up by 2 inches or 2.5, and I'll just connect this down. So after connecting down, I went ahead to cut it out before we'll now go ahead to readjust for the other side of this pattern. So at this point, if you haven't yet subscribed, please kindly hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up. So also remember to blend your bust dart while cutting out. So now we're cutting out both sides at the same time. Now what I'll do is to mark the bust dart and trace it down to the bust point now, and we'll also blend that part out. Now I'll just go ahead to cut out this point. So if you notice, I didn't go ahead to add an extra dart like to cut it like a Victorian corset. I left it this way to avoid too much joining on the pattern, since we are going to be using a mesh to make this. Now from here, I'll come down by 1.5 inches to 1.7 inches from the waistline. Then I'll merge it up, make sure this part is meeting up, then trace it down. So from here now, this measurement I have by the side, I'm just going to go ahead to connect it to this point. So if you're not okay with what we have here, there's always room for readjustment, especially before going ahead to make or join your pattern. So after this, I'll just go ahead to cut this out. So at this point, if you have any question, please kindly leave it at the comment section. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please go ahead to hit on the subscribe button. So after cutting out, this is what I have, and what I'll do is to slightly adjust one side of this pattern. Now you notice this is like a 2-in-1 dress. One is a transparent part, while the other one is like a bustier, right? So yeah, you can come up by ½ or 1 inch at the underbust, trace this out, and then trace it to the other side. So for this underbust part, I'm going to actually cut it out when we are making this dress. First of all, I'm just going to go ahead to use this pattern to trace out the mesh we are going to work with, and after that, I'll now use this pattern to cut that part out, right? So now let's move over to the back pattern. For the back pattern, I've gone ahead to mark out my measurement, which includes my shoulder to bust, waist, and I added additional 5 inches after my blouse length. Now the next step is I'll mark my dart, which is my nipple to nipple divided by 2, and place my ruler to connect. Now if you notice, I also marked the shoulder, the armhole, the chest line area. This is the exact thing I did for the front. Now for the waistline, I marked a dart intake of ½ inch on both sides. Then I'll come down by 1 inch here, go ahead to connect this all the way to the upper part, and also connect at the other side. Then from this ½ inch, I'm going to extend this down. So the dart you'll be using here should be at least 4 inches down towards the waistline. So here I'll start inserting my measurement. Mark my bust circumference divided by 4 and add ½ inch for the sewing allowance. The waistline of this dress, I'll use that snatched waistline which we deducted 2 inches from the waistline and divided by 4. Then measure the dart intake and replace and add ½ inch for the sewing allowance. Now here I'll mark my hip circumference divided by 4. Then I'll go ahead to add ½ inch for my sewing allowance. Now what I'll do is to place my ruler and connect. So I'll go ahead to place my ruler and I'll connect this all the way to the lower part of my pattern. Now after I'm done connecting, I'll just go ahead to outline my pattern. So I'll be coming down by ½ inch from the chest line and I'm going to go ahead to connect. So at the front pattern I didn't go up by ½ inch, but I went up by ½ inch for the back. So when I'm reconnecting or drafting this out on my main fabric, I'll add ½ inch at the armhole. So here come up by 2 inches or 2.5, just like we did for the front, and then go ahead to connect. So after this I'll go ahead to outline my darts. Now after that, go ahead to mark your lacing. So for the lacing area, I'm using 2 inches, which I'll just go ahead to draw out a straight line there. So you can use 1.5 or any measurement of your choice. Now for the back pattern, after cutting out one side with this pattern, on the other side, what I'll do is to go ahead to reduce the side, that is, like when we are cutting the front, one side was 1.5 while the other side is around 2 inches or 2.5 that we came up by. So after cutting this with the normal pattern, I'll reduce one side to cut the other side. So join us in our next video where we'll be making this dress. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please go ahead to hit on the subscribe button.